Horizon Treatment Services, inspiring hope and healing since 1976.
Well, hello and welcome to the Horizon Services podcast, where we'll be discussing everything industry and workforce related around substance use disorder, mental health challenges, co-occurring disorders, and best practices in recovery. My name is Jen. I'm the Director of Outreach and Talent Development at Horizon and your host for this episode. We are always looking for ways to enhance the experience of and positive long-term outcomes for our clients. And in this spirit, we're currently partnering with Vista Research and piloting a program at our Men's Bay Area residential program in Hayward, California, Cronin House. Measurement-based care is the practice of basing clinical care on client data collected during treatment. Today, to tell us more about it, I am thrilled to interview Joanna Conti, founder, CEO, and president of Vista Research. Let's get right into it. Take it away, Joanna.
Well, thank you so much, Jen, for inviting me. My name is Joanna Conti, and I'm the founder and CEO of both Vista Research Group, which is a research company that does research for addiction treatment and behavioral healthcare programs, and also the founder with my daughter of a nonprofit, Conquer Addiction, where we're trying to help families and individuals struggling with addiction to find effective treatment and to increase the likelihood they can recover. I had a daughter who was a serious alcoholic. At 20, she started, I realized she actually started earlier than that, but I realized that she was drinking day after day to potentially lethal levels. And after multiple car accidents, including being airlifted to shock trauma and stuff, I realized I absolutely had to find treatment for her immediately. And I was thrown into this world that I knew nothing about. It was impossible to find a treatment center that was scientifically measuring its effectiveness. And so instead of being able to do some research to determine where were the most effective treatment centers for someone like my daughter, I was forced repeatedly over the next 6 years to choose where to send her for treatment on the basis of how nice someone was on the phone. Rather than being positive that this was a treatment center that, was doing effective treatment. Now, we were incredibly lucky and we always found effective treatment. And as a result, my daughter has been in recovery now for over 10 years and is, completely turned her life around, has a fascinating career, has 3 darling little girls, the youngest of which is only 11 weeks old. I mean, we've been incredibly blessed. But if you'd asked me 10 years ago if this is what my daughter's future would look like, it would have been impossible to believe, because I was terrified every time the phone rang that someone was going to tell me she had died. So when she was on the path to recovery, I thought there has to be a better way for the families coming behind us to find the treatment centers that are really providing effective treatment. So as a side project, I was running a different company at the time. I decided to create a website where families searching for treatment could put in what they were looking for. It needs to be in California. It needs to, provide this type of care. It needs to take this type of insurance and so forth. And they would see a list of treatment centers with those with the best scientifically measured outcomes at the top of the list. So I created this website in 2015.
Just as a little side project, huh?
Just
a little side project. You did all this. Wow.
It was a way to give back, to the industry that saved my daughter's life and to help other families coming behind us to find effective treatment for their children and spouses and family members. So I created this website and discovered there were 5 treatment centers in the entire US who were tracking their outcomes in any kind of scientific fashion and willing to share the results with us. 5 out of thousands of addiction treatment centers. And so at that point, I almost gave up. And then I thought, I'm just a teensy bit stubborn.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
As my family would tell you. And instead, I decided to start talking to treatment center owners. And I said, I don't understand it. Why on earth aren't you tracking your outcomes? Because you're providing health care. And enough of them said, I want to, I just don't know how to do this, that I thought, all right, well, maybe I'll take the next step. And I have an incredibly odd background. Among other things, I'm a chemical engineer by training. I've started international nonprofits. I've run for Congress, of all things. And somewhere along the line, I had taught myself how to program and spent 5 years running a software company. So I could figure out how could you cost effectively monitor the outcomes for treatment centers. And I said, this isn't rocket science. And again, as a side project, I was running a different company. I said, well, I'm going to start Vista Research Group to provide this service to addiction treatment centers and the patients who rely on them. And shortly after I started doing the research for this, I was digging into all of the research about addiction treatment. And I discovered the data that showed that if you monitor how patients are doing during treatment and report those results to their clinicians, that patients get better faster. Dr. Ingrid Carlier had done an analysis of 45 different mental health clinical trials. And she discovered that among those trials where the counselors had access to data directly from the patients about how they were feeling, that those patients got better faster in 65% of the cases, including all 3 of the addiction treatment studies. So I said,
something?
this really is important, and we need to add this to what we're providing to our addiction treatment clients. So we've now been monitoring since March of 2016 patients both during treatment and following up with afterwards. We've monitored over 80,000 patients in addiction treatment, and we followed up with about 1/3 of those during the post-treatment year. And we've learned a lot.
And thank goodness you had all those experiences, because this is really important work that you're doing. So in all of the research and in all of the folks that you've tracked, have you found that there's anything specific, that any factors in particular that assist one's long-term success, their outcomes?
Yes, there's quite a number of them. We've identified at least 10 that have a big impact on how likely a patient is to recover. And again, these aren't necessarily surprising, but what's interesting is now we've got hard data proving them. One of the most important factors is, did the patient successfully complete all recommended treatment? Among patients that did not complete all recommended treatment, only about 25% of them are going to be meeting their recovery goals 1 year later. Among those that did successfully complete treatment, it's 41%. So successfully completing treatment makes a big difference. The second thing, very closely related, is the length of time that patients stay in treatment. So patients who remain in treatment for 90 days or longer have twice the likelihood of being in recovery 1 year later as those who are in treatment for 20 days or less. A third factor that makes a huge difference is the effectiveness of the treatment center that they attend. What we found is that on average, about 36% of patients are in recovery 1 year later. 36% are meeting their drug and alcohol treatment goals, whether most of our data is among centers that are proposing abstinence, and they want us to measure their patients against, were they using drugs or alcohol during the last 30 days at 1 year post-treatment. But we also have other clients that follow a harm reduction model where we allow their patients to set their own goals. Somebody who had been perhaps using meth for several years might say, I don't want to use meth anymore, but if I have a few beers or I smoke some pot, I will still consider treatment a success, and we will measure their success against those goals. So anyway, On average, about 36% of patients are meeting their recovery goals 1 year later. But the difference between different rehabs varies all across the way. At the best rehabs, over 50% of those patients are doing well 1 year later. That's better than 1 out of 2. At the worst rehabs, it's less than 1 out of 5. So the effectiveness of the treatment center that you attend makes a huge difference. Some other factors that make a big difference are what substance you're in treatment for abusing. We have the highest success rates among patients who are in treatment for alcohol use disorder. We have the worst results among patients in treatment for heroin or cocaine use disorder. So there's a big variation. Another thing that makes a big difference, and there's kind of a couple of things here, is the actions that patients take after treatment to help themselves remain in recovery. Patients who attend recovery support meetings on a regular basis do substantially better than patients that don't. So do patients who live in sober living for a while, or have randomized drug or alcohol testing, or part of an alumni program. So the actions the patient takes makes a big difference. Another thing that makes a big difference is how motivated the patient is to meet their goals at the start of treatment. It has a dramatic impact, as does whether they're a smoker. So patients who come into treatment as non-smokers are more likely to be meeting their recovery goals 1 year later than those that are light to heavy smokers. The direct looks like a direct correlation. Another thing we've discovered makes a big difference is the level of PTSD symptoms that patients are still reporting having when they leave treatment. Interestingly, we don't see the same correlation with depression or anxiety. But if patients are still reporting a lot of issues with flashbacks or, trouble sleeping or whatever as a result of their traumatic experiences, they're less likely to be in recovery. Let's see, the last one I'll talk about is the number of previous substance use disorder treatments. There seems to be a slight advantage for patients coming into treatment the very first time. If it's the second or third time, their results are almost as good. But once somebody has been in treatment many, many times, the likelihood of success really falls off. So anyway, none of that is rocket science, but now we have hard data to confirm each of those factors.
Yeah. And Joanna, I'm really interested in some of what you said. If you don't mind, I've got a few questions myself with those. So, as you said, none of it is rocket science, but now we have some data. Folks who complete their program have higher success than those who don't. And then you went on to say that in some of the, I think you said better treatment centers, there's 50%, I think, that are successful. Yes. And you didn't say for a year, like a year long after treatment, but you said within the last 30 days when checked in upon at a year. So they may or may not have relapsed in the course of that year. We're just checking in a year their success in the last 30 days. Is that right?
Right. That is how we measure success, because addiction is a chronic disease. Sure. And if somebody relapses at 6 months, but they're able to get back on, on the path to recovery, and they're not using for at least 30 days at 1 year, we consider that a success.
Okay, great. So one of the things about the folks who stay in treatment and complete it and those who don't, I can tell you that one of the most challenging parts about working with folks suffering substance use disorder and oftentimes co-occurring disorder is retention in the program. And so any ideas or tips or tricks about retaining folks?
Yes. What we do with our clients is that we get a lot of information at the start of treatment about what brought a patient to treatment, what's their primary drug of choice, how long have they been using problematically, and so forth. And we also screen them for a variety of different co-occurring disorders like depression, anxiety, trauma. We screen them for suicidality, self-harm, eating disorders, etc. And then we also get a lot of quality of life information about the patients. Where are they living? Are they working? How are they getting along with their family members? How's their health? And then throughout the time they're in treatment, we will ask them again about any of the co-occurring disorders that they were struggling with at the start of treatment. So we use academically validated scales like the PHQ-9 for depression. And we will, I'm sorry, just a second. Excuse me, I had a pet that has been scratching on the door saying, "Let me in, I hear you in there."
Yeah, I have some of those as well.
So we monitor the level of symptoms of the patient's co-occurring disorders that they're struggling with, and we monitor them throughout the time they're in treatment and report them immediately to their clinicians. So this is the how measurement-based care makes such a difference, is that because we're asking using standardized assessments about patients' feelings, we're able to identify for the clinicians things that they are struggling with that might not be immediately apparent to the clinicians. And that allows the clinicians to be a lot more productive in their treatment sessions, because they can actually see before the patient walks in, that, gosh, this patient's level of anxiety has just been climbing a great deal, or they're starting to think it would be easier to go to sleep and never wake up, that sort of thing. And so they can spend their therapy time with that patient, really diving into the issues that are really affecting that patient. We also provide a couple of open-ended questions where we ask the patient, how satisfied are you with treatment, or how well are you feeling like you're benefiting from the therapy that your clinician is providing. And after they give us, a rating from, I'm very satisfied to, I'm not at all satisfied, we'll ask why. And what we report anything that the patients tell us to the clinicians. And what we've heard through the years from our clinical users is they feel they get a very different type of information from those comments than they often get face-to-face. Mm-hmm. That some people are just a lot more comfortable talking to the anonymous internet than they are face-to-face. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many different times clinicians have told me that they learned things through the VISTA surveys that they were, totally unaware of, that changed the way that they were treating their patients.
Well, I like that, because it's just a whole nother source of information. Like it or not, time is limited with each client. And even in the best situations, if you can get information from multiple sources, I think it's only going to round out the particular service being offered to the client, to the patient. Yes. So I appreciate that.
And one of the questions that we ask, I know that a lot of your patients are in treatment using medication like Suboxone or buprenorphine or naltrexone or something. And one of the things we ask on every survey is, how satisfied are you with the medication you're on? And you can see in the charts, because we report all the results to the clinicians in real time, and you can see that, this patient was feeling very satisfied with the Suboxone they were taking before, but all of a sudden it's really dropped, and now they're thinking, gosh, I wish I wasn't taking anything at all. And that would be a perfect thing to bring up in the therapy discussion and say, let's talk about what's going on. Would you rather try a different medication, or, are you sure you want to, stop taking it, and so forth. So we're providing a lot of information that I think improves retention, because it provides the opportunity for the clinician to know what's really going on in their patient's head.
Yeah, and I think that's valuable too, because an intervention of that sort at that point in time, usually I would imagine that the satisfied measurement at the beginning is because the patient may have noticed a substantial difference from the not taking it to the taking it.
Yes.
And what I would imagine again is that longer down the road, as they start to feel better or more stable, it gets to that thought process of maybe I don't need this.
Exactly.
Right? And that is something I think that happens with psychiatric medication and these medications, medication-assisted treatments. Because once you start to feel better, then you're kind of like, I really don't want to be dependent on something. But that's a wonderful opportunity, as you said, for the clinician to intervene and explain that.
Yes.
Right. And encourage them to, consider maintenance or whatever. So that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I have two more questions in particular, if I might. One is going to be about how we are piloting this at Cronin House. I'm very excited to hear what you think about that and what kinds of benefits we can sort of look forward to and expect. But before we get to that, I also noticed that you said, in terms of co-occurring disorders, we have not as much poor results with depression and anxiety as with PTSD. That the chances of, I think you said the chances of long-term success were lower with those experiencing PTSD. Is that what you said?
If they left treatment still experiencing a high level of PTSD symptoms, yes. What we find is, most people coming into treatment are reporting a fairly high level of depression, anxiety, trauma, suicidal thought. I mean, the whole process of entering treatment is a very difficult time.
Sure.
But what we find is that most people, shortly after they get into treatment, once they've settled in, the decision is made, they're safe, they're on a path. Usually we see the levels of depression and anxiety really plummet pretty quickly. And that's true, at all the treatment centers we work with. What I was saying, though, was that if somebody's level of trauma remains high throughout the time they're in treatment and is still high when they leave treatment, in those cases, the long-term success rate is lower. Whereas, interestingly, we didn't find the same correlation for depression and anxiety. So it was just very, frankly, surprising to me. Because we know a lot of people start taking medication to self-medicate.
Sure. And trauma is sort of in the body and long lasting. And so it takes, I think, some very intentional processing to sort of move through that. Do you find that a lot of the folks who arrive with high levels of PTSD are these folks from wars? Are these veterans? Are these folks from underserved neighborhoods and zip codes? What do you find is the correlation there? And what are they returning to? Because that was another thing that you said as one of the factors. Are they able to return to a place of support and some stability and some safety, or are they returning to their zip code, which is not offering those things?
Right. I wish I had more information about the last question you asked. Up until the last year or so, most of Vista's data has been from patients who are entering treatment with commercial insurance. We've had some patients, some centers that are Medicaid supported, but most of our research up to about a year ago has been among the commercially insured population. So I don't have as much information as I hope to have a year or two from now about the impact of economic status and safety and so forth from where people come from. I'm sorry, what was the question again? I'm sorry, I got kind of distracted.
No, I think that's it. PTSD is something, as we know, can happen for war veterans, but it also is with the adverse childhood experience studies that have been happening in terms of healthcare and long-term health outcomes, we also know that substance use and one's propensity toward that is higher, the higher their ACE score, which is just experiences of traumatic events before the age of 18. And so I was just curious, that's a passion of mine. And I was curious as to whether some of those that we're seeing having poorer outcomes were folks maybe with higher ACE scores, and whether those were, where the population is derived. That's all. So you've answered it. I think you've answered it.
We don't ask about the ACE. It would be interesting to do so, but I will say that, one thing you asked was, are most of these people coming from wars? And no. Somebody who's been dealing with a serious substance use disorder has probably had some really traumatic experiences. A lot of the young women have been raped or sexually assaulted in other ways. Maybe a lot of the young men have had other issues. They've had to, get their drugs in scary places, and they found themselves in really unsafe situations and so forth. So we see a very high level of PTSD symptoms in a large number of patients coming into treatment.
Many people who are using substances are using it to self-medicate. I believe that substance use disorder is more a result of seeking pain relief than seeking enjoyment. It starts off seeking pain relief. So, well, thank you. Very interesting, and very excited about this project that we have started with you at Cronin House in Hayward, California, one of our residential programs. Can you give me an idea of what kinds of things, programs, how do they benefit? What have been some of the challenges, or what have been some of the solutions found through the process of implementing them at residential programs?
Sure.
Tell me the good stuff. Tell me the good stuff.
Good stuff. And I'll start with saying, we know that change is always hard. There's always a transition to a new tool, like using Vista's outcomes research. What we find is that oftentimes there's one or two champions at a center, and they will say, hey, I really want to see how this works. And then they will have a breakthrough moment, a ha-ha moment, where they learn something about one of their patients from the Vista research that enables them to, have some breakthrough, and they'll start talking about it. And other people will be like, oh my gosh, I'm really going to focus on this more. And so typically over the next couple of months, I think what you'll see is that the clinicians getting more excited, more and more excited over time about the type of data that they're collecting. There might be some resistance from the patients at the beginning, but oftentimes what we'll see is, a clinician will sometimes show the patient's dashboard to the patient and show them the progress they're making. Like Wonderful. I remember, one of our clinicians was saying that he'd had a woman in treatment for 3 or 4 months who was ready to leave. It was time for her to leave, and she wasn't feeling ready. She's like, I just don't feel like I've overcome what I needed to, I don't feel like I've gotten much better. And he showed her the dashboard that showed that she had come in with really high levels of depression and anxiety, and now they were way down. And he said, look at all this hard work you've done. You have
Wonderful.
come a long way. And she's like, you're right. I am ready to do this. So, I think among the patient population too, nobody likes filling out surveys,
Sure.
So there might be some, complaining at the beginning until somebody says, hey, this is what happened as a result of using this outcomes research. And, I'm anxious now to really share how I'm feeling because it makes such a difference in the treatment that I'm provided. So probably, you're in a period of transition. I think over the next couple of months, you'll start seeing some tremendous benefits from using the research. And the other thing is, it's not just the research that, that you can look at for each clinician, which, as I said, from Dr. Dr. Carlier has found that patients get better faster with that sort of feedback loop to the clinicians.
Sure.
But we also enable your management team to look at all of this data they're collecting in aggregate. And you can start to see maybe that satisfaction is going down in this area, and you can look and see what type of comments people are making and maybe nip a problem in the bud. Or you can see that maybe one therapist is particularly good at treating people's anxiety, and maybe that therapist could do some training for the other therapists and things like that. So I think you'll start to see a whole lot of benefits. And then a year from now, when you start getting the post-treatment outcomes, and you can see how many people are still doing well a year later as a result of the treatment that your team has provided, and the type of comments they make, on the 6-month and 1 year surveys, we ask them, to tell us what really made a difference for them in their treatment. And some of them will go on and on about, how helpful their therapist was, or, this made such a difference, or the team made such a difference. And so it's a way for the folks at Cronin House to really get wonderful feedback about the very difficult work they're doing, and to know that it's really appreciated and it really is making a difference in people's lives.
Well, and Joanna, I think that is really valuable, because oftentimes when we do this work, whether folks stay the whole time or whether they leave early, we've often invested, heart and relational energy and vulnerability and all of these things into an individual, and we often don't know how it plays out. And so that the workers, that the folks who do this work on the ground are, I did it years ago, and I recall just not knowing if I was making an impact. And so I think, like you said, having some of these charts and this data to be able to show folks, this is the progress that we're making as a program, that you're making as a clinician. This is how many people. Do you remember that one guy? Yeah, he's still sober. And look what he said. These are really, really important, because we have to keep our patients inspired and hopeful for their tomorrow. And that is in large part by how inspired and hopeful the clinicians feel, in doing this work. And so it's critical, I think, in this challenging work for everybody involved to stay in a positive frame of mind. And getting this kind of insight, feedback loop, is, I think, incredibly valuable. And I said it before we started, but I'll say it now while we're recording. I want to thank you for doing this work. I'm so happy for your daughter and your family that she was able to find, a new day, and grateful that this work is no doubt helping others to do the same.
Well, I feel very honored to be able to work with the people around the country who are just doing incredible work helping people recover from their addictions. It's very, very hard work. I mean, I remember I could never be a clinician. I just wanted to strangle my daughter at so many different points.
Yeah.
But it's really exciting to be partnering with people who are making such a difference in people's lives across the country. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Absolutely.
Our mission is to cultivate or restore a sense of hope, self-awareness, and community to people impacted by substance use and mental health challenges. We do that by providing effective trauma-informed prevention, treatment, and recovery services. You can learn more about us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or at our website, www.horizonservices.org.